It was a quiet, foggy evening when four friends, Thomas, Sarah, Jack, and Emily, decided to take a shortcut through Blackwood Forest. They were returning from a nearby town after a day of hiking, and the sun had already set. Though the forest had a reputation for being eerie at night, none of them took the local legends seriously. "Come on, it's just a bunch of trees," Jack said confidently, waving off Emily's concerns. "We'll be home in no time." The deeper they went into the forest, the thicker the fog became, clinging to their clothes and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The trees stretched high above them like skeletal arms, their twisted branches blotting out what little moonlight there was. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the crunch of their footsteps on the dry leaves below. "Why does it feel like someone's watching us?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "Stop being paranoid," Thomas said, though he couldn't shake the feeling either. He glanced around, but all he saw were shadows shifting in the mist. Every now and then he thought he heard faint whispers, too soft to make out, but always there. About an hour into their walk, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her eyes wide with fear. They all paused, straining their ears. At first, there was nothing, only the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. But then they heard it, a soft, distant whisper, as if someone was calling their names. It echoed through the forest, sending chills down their spines. "Who's there?" Jack called out, trying to sound brave. No answer. The whispering continued, growing louder and more distinct. It didn't sound human. It was as if the forest itself was speaking to them, beckoning them deeper into its dark heart. "We need to leave," Emily said, clutching Thomas's arm. "Now." They picked up their pace, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. No matter how far they walked, they couldn't find the path that led out. The fog grew denser, wrapping around them like a living thing. Suddenly, Jack stopped and pointed ahead. "Look," he said. Through the fog, they could see a faint light flickering in the distance. Desperate for any sign of help, they headed toward it. As they got closer, they realized it was an old cabin, its windows glowing dimly with the light of a single candle. "I don't know if this is a good idea," Sarah said hesitantly. "We don't have a choice," Thomas replied. "We can't stay out here all night." They approached the cabin and knocked on the door. There was no answer. Jack tried the handle, and to their surprise, the door creaked open. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and broken furniture scattered across the floor. "Hello?" Thomas called out, but his voice only echoed back at him. As they stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind them, making Emily scream. Jack rushed to open it again. It wouldn't budge. "We shouldn't be here," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of her heart. Then they heard it again, the whispering. But this time it was coming from inside the cabin. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They sounded like 100 voices speaking at once, all saying the same thing. "Stay with us. Stay forever." Panicking, they searched for another way out. Thomas found a trapdoor in the floor and yanked it open. A cold, damp air rushed up from the darkness below. Without thinking, they climbed down, one by one, into what appeared to be an underground tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and claustrophobic, with roots hanging down from the ceiling and water dripping from the walls. They had no idea where it led, but they knew they couldn't stay in the cabin. As they walked, the whispering followed them, growing louder and louder until it was deafening. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them gave way, and they fell into a deep pit. Thomas hit the ground hard, the wind knocked out of him. He groaned in pain and looked around. The others were lying nearby, dazed but alive. They were in a large underground chamber, its walls covered in strange, ancient symbols that seemed to glow faintly in the dark. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. Before anyone could answer, they heard footsteps approaching. Out of the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in black, its face hidden beneath a hood. The figure raised a hand, and the whispering stopped. "You shouldn't have come here," the figure said, its voice cold and hollow. "Now you belong to the forest." "No, we just want to leave," Jack shouted. The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the chamber. "There is no escape. The forest takes what it wants." Suddenly, The symbols on the walls flared brightly, and the ground began to shake. The friends huddled together, terrified, as the figure raised its hand again. But just as it seemed they were doomed, Thomas noticed something, a small, faintly glowing symbol on the floor near his feet. Without thinking, he reached out and touched it. A blinding light filled the chamber, and the figure let out a scream of rage. The ground beneath them crumbled, and they fell once again. When they opened their eyes, they were lying on the forest floor. The fog had lifted, and the first rays of dawn were breaking through the trees. The forest was silent, peaceful. "We made it," Sarah whispered in disbelief. They stumbled out of the forest and onto the road, vowing never to return. But as they walked away, Thomas glanced back and saw something that made his blood run cold. The figure, standing at the edge of the forest, watching them with glowing red eyes. The forest hadn't let them go. Not completely.